Okay, so today we're going to talk about trophic pyramids and take some notes on what we've covered over the last few days. So I'm going to start right here at the bottom, which is where our energy starts, and start with our producers. So let me turn my pen on, that'd be helpful. Okay, so I'm going to start, and I'm just going to highlight green down here in the producers so that I remember that producers are things like grasses and trees, and they're what produces their own energy, which is why we call them producers. So right here in this box, I'm going to write that they make their own food. So examples of this would be grass, it could be an oak tree, it could be an apple tree. We call these things autotrophs. So when we talk about trophic levels, this has to be related to food. So autotrophs automatically create their own food, and where they get those things from is a combination of sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water, which they convert via photosynthesis into a usable food product. Now, as we move up, so I'm going to highlight, I'm going to add some red here just to remind myself that we're going up the food chain. We get to what's called the heterotrophs. And these guys need to make their own food, or need to eat. So they can't make their own food. So primary consumers, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to color this guy like we'll go with a light blue. Here are my primary consumers. And these are what we often consider prey animals, herbivores. Let's change this to blue. Okay, so these guys are things like deer, rabbits. I'm going to put the word herbivore right here, meaning they're plant eaters. And these guys directly eat the consumer. So we have deers and rabbits. We have herbivores, which are plant eaters. Now, I call these guys the hunted, so to remind you that they're often lower on the food chain, prey animals. Now we move up to the secondary consumers. I'll color these guys a little bit darker blue. So our secondary consumers are often the omnivores. They could eat plants, they could eat meat, but generally in any food chain, the secondary consumers are the ones who eat the primary consumers. So they're getting secondhand energy from the producer. So these guys are often things like frogs and fish and snakes. So we have frog, fish, we get snakes. These guys eat the prey that comes before them. And we're going to say that our secondary consumers, they eat the primary consumer. So they eat the primary consumer. And last but not least, we have our tertiary, which means third. So our third level consumers are our big time predators. So these are our apex predators. We've talked about a few of these so far, but things like the wolf, great white shark. They could be things like eagles, hawks. They're carnivores. Now, why does this pyramid exist this way? Why do we care about the shape of the pyramid? I'm just going to add some gray for some color here. So why do we care about the shape, and why is it shaped like a pyramid? Remember that energy gets used and decreases as it moves up the pyramid. So I'm going to write in, we'll choose purple, that if I have, we'll say 10,000 kilocalories of energy down here, when it gets to the primary consumers, remember it's the 10% rule, so I then only have 1,000 kilocalories. And then as I get to the secondary consumers, I have 100 kilocalories. And lastly, as I get to the top, I have 10 kilocalories. And we call this, I'm going to put this in black here, the 10% rule. And go ahead and highlight that one in bright yellow because this one's important. It's all important, but this is what gives our entire ecosystem the structure that it does. So remember, the reason we have only 4 or 5 links in a food chain is because the energy gets so small. If there was something on top of this that ate the wolf, it would get almost no energy. So it's just not practical to exist above a tertiary consumer. And remember, the rest of that energy is lost as metabolic heat. And this is just heat produced from our bodies going through their daily processes. So up here I'm going to put an example of a food chain. And remember, the key here is that the arrows show the flow of energy, not who eats who. So, for example, I might have grass. Grass is my primary producer. Again, shows the energy flow. Let's say the grass is eaten by, say, a snail. By a snail. And we'll choose orange. That snail is eaten by a small bird who is ultimately eaten by a hawk. There's always hawks. So it's showing that the energy, let's say 30,000 kilocalories, goes up to the snail, 3,000 kilocalories, goes up to the small bird, 300 kilocalories, goes up to the hawk, 30 kilocalories, which again is why we don't continue much beyond that level. So let's go down here and wrap up. So we also have something called decomposers. And the decomposers break down the dead organic waste, so the dead organisms, and the waste, and they're going to recycle that energy back down to the producers. So examples of these guys are bacteria, fungi, and earthworms. So we're not going to talk a whole lot about them right now, though they are very important that they recycle that energy. Last but not least, we're going to go with the abiotic and biotic parts of an ecosystem. So non-living parts of the environment often have a great impact on the living organisms in an ecosystem. So examples of this would be hot temperatures. Temperature is abiotic. Cause a plant to wilt. So your plant gets droopy and sad. The plant is biotic. And the temperature is abiotic. Other abiotic things are things like weather. It could be rainfall. It could be the pH of the soil, which we'll talk about later. And the biotic things are animals and plants. Okay, so here's our little primer on trophic pyramids.